us have chosen to write their own vows. So, Sarah.
I promise to care for you and love you our entire life. I promise to be your best friend.
Whoa. You can't just be saying best friend, okay? Pete's my best friend.
Hold up. I thought I was his best friend. We've been through a lot together.
Gosh, we have been through so much together. Second grade was really rough for us.
I remember when he fell off the monkey bars.
I mean, he gave me his fruit roll-up.
I gave him my fruit roll-up. That was like...
I hope he knows that he's my best friend.
Our friendship has survived so much. You think that this is gonna divide us?
I promise to be your most loyal friend.
I'm loyal too! She is confusing me so much right now.
She is my wife. He is my best friend.
Who's the best friend here? Who?
As this journey of life completely changes us, we'll be together forever.
Dude!
Aw, he's crying.
I'm gonna have to be gluten-free.
Oh man, dude, you go gluten-free. I have to be gluten-free. And I don't want to be gluten-free, man. It's the end of an era, Davis. It's the end of an era.
Yes, I am crushing these vows.
I would like to object right now, but I want to do it at the right time.
Please don't do it, Pete.
Look,
please.
I'm going to object. I'm going to object. My hand's going up. My hand's going up.
Don't.
It's going up. I object.
We're going to miss those couples, aren't we? Oh, temptation, man. Oh, boy. So today is our last installment of In the Ring, Fighting for Your Marriage. Next week, as it's already been mentioned, we begin a new series, Secrets. It's 3 parts, and we'll be going through some of the things that we wonder if people even know about us. What are we hiding in our lives? And it sounds like, ooh, I don't know if I want that series. But really, the long-term outcome of that series is some words that Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, some say, wrote these words. And he said this. He said, if you cover up your sins or your secrets, you'll never do well. But if you confess them and forsake them, you'll be blessed by mercy. And most of us don't ever come to terms with the idea that really some of those secrets, some of those sins open up the door for God's mercy in our life. So as we start into that series next week for 3 weeks, it might start a little bit hard, but as we get to the end of it, really I'm looking forward to it because it ends with the idea that God wants to usher in mercy into the secrets of our lives. And so I think that will be pretty good. But till then, we're in part 3 this morning. And this morning, we're going to really look at this idea of male and female, similar yet different. And, there is this similarity, but then there's this difference. We saw that in all the openers we've seen. One thought's going through the bride's mind, one thought's going through the groom's, and they'll get it, but there is this similarity, yet there's this difference. We even see it in inanimate objects. There we go. Sometimes we see they have more of a female kind of pronoun or a male pronoun, and it's supposed to, in a sense, kind of describe what's going on or describe those characteristics. Up until I think it was 1979, hurricanes were always classified as female, as she. And, I have to be honest with you, I've met some hurricanes that are women, but I've also met some hurricanes that are men. And it wasn't until 1979 that they decided to go either or every time. And what was kind of funny is I looked that up. I found out that the 2 names that they retired back in 1979, the first year they did that, was David and Frederick. That's my first name and that's my middle name. And I wondered if my mother had something to do with that. But that is the time I turned 13, and the 2 hurricanes that year were, I guess, named after me. But anyway, this idea, again, of being similar yet different. And to try to get us into this thinking, to try to see this a little bit, I came across some of these ideas, and I thought I would share them with you. I'm going to take 6 inanimate objects, and I'm going to ask you, is this male or is this female? Okay? And so we'll see if you're right, and I think I am right, but we'll see what you think. All right, so first object is hammer. Male or female? Male. No female takers out there? All right, there we go. All right, we got one. But it is male. And the reason for this is a couple things. First of all, hasn't changed much in the last 5,000 years. Sorry, guys. Not really exciting. It's a hammer. Yet at the same time, it's nice to have around. All right. Here we go. Buckle up. I'm going to get myself really alienated from both male and female this morning. All right, next one. Remote control. No. That's very confusing because actually I think it's female. Because the remote gives a man pleasure. They are lost without it. And it helps with our self-image when we're holding it. So remote control definitely is female. Ziploc bags.
Yeah, I use them a lot.
Yeah, you do use them a lot? I actually, yep. All right. No one dares because they're going, these just off the wall. All right, we're going to say this is male. And this is because they hold everything inside. And you can see right through them. So that's definitely a male, right? Okay. All right. Next one. A sponge. Male, female. Female. All right. Soft and squeezable. And they retain water. Okay. Thank you for these donuts, love. Thank you for these apple fritters. I won't be getting anything else to eat the rest of the day. All right. Tire. Male. Yeah, male. Going bald. Often overinflated. Okay, all right. All right, our last one is one of these. It's a copy machine. Female, very good. Yeah, female. Here we go. Gotta loosen them. Once they're turned off, it takes a long time for them to warm up. It gets worse. Great at reproduction. If you know the right buttons to push. All right. Back to his eyes, fighting for your marriage. Male and female, similar yet different. And because of that, if we're not careful, we've seen all along, week number 1, we've seen that really most issues in relationship and marriage, of course, come when our expectations aren't met. We have different expectations. We're similar, we have expectations, but again, we're different. And when those expectations they don't even have to be right or wrong expectations. They can just be a different way of looking at it. I know there's times, at least once or twice, where, I've had certain expectations when I walk in the door. Cindy has different expectations when I walk in the door, and either expectations are valid and fine, but because we haven't talked about our expectations, there's a little bit of tension because I wanted to do this and she wanted to do that. And over the years, we've learned to sometimes call when I'm driving home to say, what's going on tonight? And that's kind of her decode, what is your expectations for this evening? We don't have anything going on. What do you want to do? So this idea of expectations. But, there does get to be these moments where the expectations are different. And it's just hard. And we saw this at the first week when we wrapped things up. We said, what do we do when we're not sure of what to say or do? And, sometimes we just don't know. And we want the outcome to be positive. And we're just not sure. Sometimes I'll have to say to Cindy, just tell me yes, no, what you want me to do. I have no stake in the game. And sometimes when I say that with a little bit of an attitude, it actually creates more of a problem because I'm basically just saying, tell me what to do because I want to avoid a problem because I think your expectations are going to be different than mine. Mine are a little bit brighter, but so what do you do when you're not sure? We said, love like God through Christ who loved you. And this comes into this whole idea of this mutual submission. We talked about this submission competition. And this whole idea of having Christ and God's fingerprints on our hearts, on our lives, so that when we get into those things, we just don't have a clue. And we need to love the other person like God, through Christ, has loved us. And if you're still kicking around the tires of faith, this is a hard one for you. Because, I'm going to say from my perspective, I'm a pastor, you're at a church, and so I'm going to say that God connected to your life, in your life, helps you walk through those times. And, we're going to say that when you say yes to Christ, God connects himself to your life. We're going to say the Holy Spirit comes and is a part of your life, and he gives us directions, gives us guidance. That doesn't mean it's problem-free, but what it does mean is that we just have a little bit more resources so that when you and I are navigating those waters where we're not really sure what to do, we've got God kind of leading us. Now, I've had guys and women, make that into an excuse, and they say, God's leading me this way, and that's really not true. But when you sincerely are in that place, and you're not sure of what to do, love like God through Christ who loved you. And last week, Cindy and I tag teamed, and sorry to let you down. There's not two stools up here this week because she did a great job. Thank you for donuts, and thank you for last week. So she was actually listening, or I'm listening, whatever. But this idea that when you get her, you get her. And we could say the same too. When you get him, you get him. When you really listen and learn and discover who that person is, and you start to understand them, and you're trying to discover who they are, and you get them, you actually get the other person's heart. And we see, sometimes it's complex things that get the other person. Sometimes it's an apple fritter that gets the person's heart. You start to see that. And so as we wrapped up last week when we were looking for her eyes, it's the same for his eyes. Now, I've said this all along that, this is a PJ-13 message, and I just need to go through this again. We're going to talk about some things that when you get home, you may need to give some parental guidance to your kids. And that's a good thing. I said last week, and I'll say often whenever we touch on these kinds of things, this really is a gift to you because it brings up a concern, it brings up an issue that not necessarily you talk about all the time around the dinner table or on the way home from church, but this gives you that opportunity. So when your kids are at that age-appropriate time, subjects like this you ought to talk about. They ought to hear it from you as a parent first, rather than hear it from the culture around them or their other peers who really don't know what they're talking about but think they know what they're talking about. So again, that kind of a thing is a gift for you. So I hope you look at it that way. Now, last week we talked about the 5 needs that women have. We've got it from this book, His Needs, Her Needs, by a guy named, let me just get it right, Willard Harley. This isn't a Christ-centered book, and we said last week that that's okay. That's okay. Just because it's not a Christ-centered book doesn't mean it can't give us a good diagnosis. It can't size up a problem, say, this is a problem, these are issues. Now, sometimes the answer is weak from our perspective as people of faith. And the same thing with Mr. Harley's answers. They're weak, and we don't get into that. But the fact that he surveyed all these men and women, and this book has been out for 25 plus years, it's sold millions of copies, it's gotten some traction in people's lives because they see these things to be true and be real in their life. And again, as I get into these, all these 5 may not be you, and maybe just 1 or 2. Maybe it's 3, but at least they give you some ideas to think about as you think about, stepping into the ring, fighting for your marriage. This is kind of some of the places where a guy comes from. So let's get right into it. His 5 needs, and what are they? And these are not, they're in my perspective, they're not in a order today of weakest to highest, that kind of thing. They're just 5 needs, and at different times of life, these needs can eclipse one or the other one. But these are just 5 concepts we're throwing out there. The first one is admiration. Admiration. And really, again, as we saw last week and the week before, our baseline is this idea of submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So sometimes the other person doesn't deserve it at all. But the reason you submit to the other person, and we've given more in-depth definitions in previous weeks, but the reason you submit to the other person isn't because they necessarily deserve it. It's out of reverence for Christ. It's because of what Christ has done for you and for me. And so we submit. Next verse says, wives, submit to yourselves to your own husbands, and as you do to the Lord. And this whole idea of this idea of submission. And again, this is key, this idea of to the Lord. Now, I have discovered that when men live a God-honoring servant leadership kind of life, women are more apt to, wives are more apt to follow their lead. When a man is selfish, and it really is all about him, when he dresses it up in a package and it's really about him and he sometimes spiritualizes it, that's not right. But when someone really is looking out for the best interests of another, it's just easier, a little bit easier to follow their lead or swallow. I can think about that even growing up. I knew my parents had my best interest at heart. I didn't always like it. I didn't always understand it. But it was just a little bit easier to trust them because they had my best interest at heart. The same thing comes up when it comes to this idea of in the ring in marriage. And really, submission is an invitation to lead. This isn't in your notes. But submission is an invitation to lead. So in a healthy relationship, because there are exceptions in the sense of some things that have gone on in the past that people are still walking with a limp. In a healthy relationship, many times, most of the time, a wife would like her husband to step in and set the tone and lead the household in a positive way. And so when we as women, we as women, that doesn't sound right, but when women give, in a sense, the opportunity for a man to lead, it has to basically, here, you set the tone. And so if you don't want your husband to ever lead, then don't submit to him. And I've seen some situations where couples married, and the wife has more expertise in an area, and the husband's getting up to speed. A lot of times it happens in spiritual world. Maybe the wife has been a Christ follower for years and years and years, and and now they're getting married, and now the guy's trying to figure out married life. He's trying to figure out what it means to be other-centered, Christ-centered, but he doesn't know all the spiritual stuff, and the wife does. And I've watched cases where a wife with art steps back and gives him the invitation to lead. And I've also watched in situations where at every turn, when the man tries to lead into that and learn that, he gets slapped down. And I think I've told you the story about Sam and Irma. They've gone to be with the Lord years and years ago, but Sam was a professional police chief kind of guy, ran for state positions and stuff like that, and all of that. But when he and his wife got married, Irma was definitely the spiritual giant in the home. And Sam tried to lean into leading, and every time he would, he didn't really see it right. Now, there's sometimes you got to say, "Hi, no, honey, this," but every time. So he very quickly, within the first few years of their marriage, knew that she was the spiritual leader, and he had nothing to say about that. He would succeed on all these areas, but she would shut him down. And so the time I really discovered that, I always wondered why Sam would always be at church, but really seemed not to be engaged. And he had a massive heart attack. He was in his early 80s, and I'm in meeting with him. And he says, "You know, Dave, Irma takes care of all the spiritual stuff in our life." I go, "Oh, really? Tell me about that." And he started to tell his story about as they were getting married, she knew more, and the way she communicated what she knew shut him out. So he finally said, "You know, I want admiration. I don't want shame. I want respect. So I'm going to just back off from this. I'll do everything else. I'll succeed in business. I'll succeed in finances. But I'm just going to leave this to Irma." And then it was very interesting. They had two boys, and this sounds very stereotypical, but those two boys growing up in that home discovered that spiritual engagement was more feminine than masculine. So as time went on, these boys were all over the place. And it's not the only reason. But I think some of the reason was that spiritual life, even though they were Christ followers, spiritual life, having a handle on that, was feminine, not masculine. So if you want to give the man in your life the opportunity to lead, submission, letting him lead, he's not going to get it right all the time. He's not Jesus. He's not going to get it right all the time. Now, that man, that does not give us permission to be sloppy, demanding, self-centered. We need to take that with some serious thinking. But it's this idea that we have this opportunity. And again, and that gives us a women's submission is so important because it's an invitation for her husband to actually lead, set the tone of the family, and have this where each complement each other. So, going on to verse 22, we read this again. Wives understand, I love the way Eugene Peterson renders this. Wives understand and support your husbands in ways that show your support for Christ. So, we get all hung up with the word submission. Again, it's been used in places and in ways that really aren't right. But it's this idea of support, allow your husband to lead. Because he's wired that. He wants to be admired. He wants to be respected. That's why you've got this whole, I think it's even in our library, our resource, this book called Love and Respect. And it's all this idea about how a man communicates love and how a woman communicates respect. Because we're just wired for that. We want to be admired. I know in my own life when Cindy says something as simple as "you're a good man," I'm like, wow. Saying that is better than even apple fritter donuts. It thrills my heart when she's not doing it winking like "you're a bad man, but you're a good man," but when she really means "you're a good guy," and because that's the person that's most important in my life. So hearing it from her, it just is huge for me. It's huge for me. Going through a rough week and she knows what I'm going through or whatever, and she just reinforces, she gives me respect and admiration, and it's not she's just saying it because you're supposed to say that. I think she really believes it. Even when I don't feel like a good man. Even when I don't feel like I'm getting it done. I know on a Sunday morning it's nice when someone says, "Hey, great sermon, Dave." I'm like, thank you. And that's all nice and that's all kind. But when Cindy says it, that just, okay, that's good. That satisfies me. So again, this idea of support. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up. We've talked a little bit about that. And the same goes for your wives. Be good wives to your husbands. Be responsive to their needs. And so again, it's not about I get this, you get this. We've talked about that, the compromise kind of a relationship where you almost in a sense keep track, and as long as it's balanced, you're good. No, it's being responsive to the other person's needs. And when you're moving in that same direction together, it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I like what Peter says here. He says, the same goes for your wives. Be good wives to your husbands, responsive to their needs. There are husbands who, indifferent as they are to any word about God, will be captive by your life of holy beauty. And what Peter's saying here is this amazing thing. When wives are this responsive, affirmation, it actually turns the hearts of their husbands. And we probably all could share some stories where, a husband just wasn't into anything, and the wife hung in there. Not abusive, but just hung in there. And all of a sudden, that husband his heart's changed. I can remember this story growing up. There was this woman who would come to church all the time, brought her 2 boys, and her husband's a great guy, and just fantastic guy. He did work on my parents' house and that kind of thing. He was a contractor guy and all of that. And you just always wondered why he had no connection to spiritual things. He was just really nice. You enjoyed being in his presence. I can remember as a little kid, he was doing work, and he was very kind to us as kids, and that kind of thing would take time. It wasn't like, kid, you bother me kind of thing. It wasn't until I want to say 15, 20 years later, all of a sudden, that just grabbed his heart. And he actually ended up going to Bible college and becoming a pastor. And again, now you guys are like, oh no, don't be that respectful, because I do not want to be a pastor. I hope that doesn't happen to me. But this point of the story is this, that because of her heart, responsive to his needs, he was captivated by it. And it was a holy beauty. And so again, that affirmation. The next one here is this idea of shared household responsibilities. And you go, what is that? I don't want to go back to the 1950s. What is all that about? And just to have a little fun, I came across this newspaper article about the 1950s. And this is the council. Hate me now, hate me later. This is the counsel that was in the paper to women and their wives. First of all, have dinner ready. That's great. Plan ahead even the night before to have a delicious meal ready on time for his return. This is a way of letting him know that you've been thinking about him and are concerned about his needs. Most men are hungry when they come home, and the prospect of a good meal, especially his favorite dish, is a part of the warm welcome needed. Doesn't that sound great? Prepare yourself. I love this. I actually had a friend who got married a little bit later, and she purposely they didn't need a job, so she didn't have a job, and she would do this. So I was like, wow, this is crazy. But anyway, it's prepare yourself. Take 15 minutes to rest so you'll be refreshed when he arrives. Touch up your makeup, put a ribbon in your hair, and be fresh looking. He's just been with a lot of work-weary people. Be a little gay and a little more interesting. His boring day may need a lift, and one of your duties is to provide it. Another one says, clear away the clutter, make the house immaculate. Another one is prepare the children. Take a few minutes to wash the children's faces and hands if they're small. Good point. Comb their hair, and if necessary, change their clothes. They are little treasures, and he would like to see them playing the part. Another one, minimize all noise. At the time of arrival, eliminate all noise of the washer machine, the dryer, the vacuum cleaner. Try to encourage the children to be quiet. Be happy to see him. Greet him with a warm smile and show sincerity in your desire to please him. Listen to him. You may have a dozen of important things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. Remember, his topics of conversation are more important than yours. Ooh. I'm not making this stuff. This is 1950s. Don't greet him with complaints and problems. It goes on and on. Make him comfortable. I like this one. Have him lean back in a comfortable chair or have him lie down in the bedroom. Have a cool or warm drink ready for him. Arrange his pillow and offer to take off his shoes. Speak in a low, soothing, and pleasant voice. You know, those apple fritters were nothing, hon. What is going on with you? I'm insulted by them. Make the evening his. Never complain if he comes home late or goes out to dinner or other places of entertainment without you. Instead, try to understand his world of strain and pressure and his very real need to be home and relax. Your goal, try to make sure your home is a place of peace, order, and tranquility, where your husband can renew himself in body and spirit. And I almost don't even want to say this last line, but I'm going to say it anyway. A good wife always knows her place. Some of you grew up in homes where your moms read that stuff. I mean, that is crazy. And, I'll say this. Some of the tension that exists in all of this, honestly, is because men, the previous generations, did a horrible job at cherishing their wives. And they expected that kind of thing. But at the same time, there's this idea of this shared responsibility. I like to think this is in your notes, this idea of better together. Better together. So as you start your life together and as life unfolds, you all of a sudden discover that there are some things you're good at, there's some things she's good at, and you start to let that work out. You complement one another. I've shared with you before that when we were first married, I took care of the checkbook, and that was fine. I was able to write checks and all of those kinds of things. And, as time went on, Cindy took over the checkbook. Some of the reason was she was just better at adding. I'm terrible at adding, terrible at balancing. Never had a bounce check, but it's just she was better at that. And again, this whole idea that we trusted each other and we shared responsibilities. This may get in trouble. I'm the one who makes the bed every morning. It's not because I'm the last one in it, but I do make the bed every morning. I do my own laundry. You find out the things that work, but this idea of shared responsibility, not this stereotypical kind of thing. Back when it all got started, in Genesis we read, "It's not good for the man to be alone, so I will create a companion for him, a perfectly suited partner." And that's what we're talking about, this shared life together. We share life together. We're better together than not. And all of us bring different things to the table, and we try to figure all that out. And as that's shared, we find that it's just really great. We end up complementing each other. There's strengths and weaknesses. When I do premarital counseling, and somebody, they're exactly the same on certain things, that actually I get that has a red flag, because that means there's going to be some blind spots in their life. That doesn't mean they're incompatible, but it means you need to watch this area. Sometimes I have a couple that will just use finances that are really astute with finances, that's fine. Then I have a couple that both of them aren't even aware of it. So there's a blind spot there, or there's one that's more generous than the other one. And so, again, having this complements each other. Now with this, I need to say this too, is that, when you think about life together, when you think about being married, when you think about finding that perfect suited partner for life, you need to realize that as a Christ follower, this is designed to complement your life, not complete your life. Christ is the one, God is the one who completes your life, completes my life. So as we're thinking about this, and we're thinking about marriage, and we're thinking about all of this, I've talked to you about this before, one of the things that really attracted me to Cindy is that Cindy loved God, and still does, more than she loves me. That's where she finds her completeness. I cannot complete her life. I may be good, but I'm not that good. She has to find that in God. And so even when sometimes a couple's getting together and they're starting to talk about marriage, there's this idea that, now I'm going to be complete. Your spouse, you can't lay that on them. There's this share, there's this better together. Complement, yes, but not complete. Now we're going to get into some other areas, and I have to say this, when we went through the list last week for her needs, they were much more noble and spiritual, and when we get into the guys, they sound like, man, it's just not as good a list, but here we go. Number 3 is an attractive spouse. And you go, ooh, what's that mean? Guys, just, what are they just interested in external things? What's up with that? This isn't the idea that we're expecting our wives to be supermodels, but we're expecting our wives to be the best they can be. And there is this idea that men in particular need to have chemistry with the person they're going to be with. It has to be there. So there has to be some attractiveness. Sometimes you get these situations where when the wife goes out, with her girlfriend, she dresses to the 9 yards and just looks unbelievable, but that's about the only time she does that. And there needs to be this idea of attractiveness, this idea of that there's this chemistry there, and it's just the way guys are wired, and so be thinking about that. Be thinking about being attractive to your spouse. Song of Solomon reads this: "You are as beautiful as Tezra, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem." Can you imagine saying that to you're as beautiful as Rochester and Boston and Washington, D.C. Different time, different words. As majestic as troops with banners, as majestic as tanks with their, banners. Turn your eyes from me, they overwhelm me. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Gilgal. But the idea is that Solomon here is captivated by his wife. And I'm gonna show you a picture. We're not gonna go through this. Somebody drew what this actually looks like. I'm like, wow, that's disgusting. But that's what he, over and over again, they took all the little imagery out there. But again, this whole idea of being attractive and doing your best, and that's important. That's important to a man. It's kind of funny that when you start dating someone and you bump into another buddy and they say, "Wow, I saw you out with Susie Q or whoever," and they say, "Yeah, why? She's pretty attractive," and the guy goes, "Yeah, thank you," and you're like, well, "Why? Thank you. Why is the guy thanking anything for the beauty of his date or whatever?" But there is this idea that there's something that goes on there, that attractiveness is important to the way God has wired us. Now in 1 Peter we read this, and this goes along with this, that we want to make sure the inner beauty connects with the outer beauty. Let your true booty, yeah, that's good. Let your true beauty come from your inner. Aren't you happy you don't have to do these messages? Yeah. Let your true beauty come from inner personality, not a focus on the external. For lasting beauty comes from a gentle and peaceful spirit, which is precious in God's sight and is much more important than the outward adornments of elaborate hair, jewelry, and fine clothes. It doesn't mean that doesn't matter, but really in the best marriages are when the inner beauty makes the outer beauty come alive. So there's a connection there, and that's important to a guy. So take that for what it's worth. Also, there's this idea of recreational companionship, and this idea that guys like to do stuff, and you going along with him even when it's not really doesn't really resonate with you. Back to verse 18 of Genesis 2, said differently. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him." Isn't that nice? Just right for him. That you're involved in each other's lives. You're not just roommates. You're just not business partners. But you actually, you're right for each other. She's right for you. But a lot of times, women will just, any of the things the guy is interested in kind of like puts it over here. and just doesn't pay attention to those things. Here's your guy, and he wants to be companion with you. He wants to do stuff with you. The stuff that he wants to do doesn't resonate with you, but the idea of doing stuff with him should be the drive for you to do those kinds of things. I've shared this video before, but I just love it, so I got to share it again.
Sweetie? Come with me. Watch this.
She doesn't care. How many times does Cindy go and act interested in something that I'm interested in because she's interested in me? Usually once every 1 or 2 years, we'll get a really good snowstorm, and we're stuck in the house, and I say, Cindy, let's go take a walk around the neighborhood. She's like, okay, and we're out there. I got my ski goggles on. Look like the Michelin Man. We got all this stuff wrapped around. We're stomping around. The wind's blowing, and all this kind of stuff. Because I think it's so cool to be out there in the snow and everything. And there's Cindy side by side. She does not like that at all, but she does it for relational companionship. She does those things. Oh, cuts both ways, yes. But if you really want to have this close connection with your man, you got to take some interest in some things just because he's interested in it. I mean, you do that for your kids. Kids do all kinds of crazy things, and you show interest in them, and you can't wait till they go through that phase. But you show up, you're there, sporting events, whatever, because you're interested in them. And men long for that. In the book Love and Respect, he talks about side by side, shoulder to shoulder kinds of things. And, sometimes I get these new gadgets all the time, that can do this new little thing. I go, honey, look at this, but she looks at it and goes, wow, that is neat, and, just trying to be a part of my world. And, again, it's both ways. Like this little Kenyan proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, take someone with you. And I think all of us want to have that complementing relationship, that life together. Now, here comes the next one, and buckle up, and you're ready for this. This is one of those ones I don't really want to talk about, but I will because it's real. That one of men's needs is sexual fulfillment, and this is the way God has wired you. And wired us. And that's actually a good thing. Because I want to say this. This is one experience that can be exclusive between you and your spouse. That's unbelievable. Isn't it great that your husbands are wired that way? But you need to be aware. We live in a world where there's a lot out there. And so if we don't have an eye towards this idea of sexual fulfillment, there are plenty of free samples around. And that doesn't lessen his responsibility. But you got to remember that God has wired him like that. And again, isn't that awesome? That is one thing that you can experience with your man that you don't experience with anyone else, and he doesn't experience with anyone else. Isn't it? It's a gift. So you can have that, just the two of you. That's fantastic. And so this is really important. And men want to know that their love of their life is actually interested, engaged, not just doing their wifely service to their husband. They want their spouse to show up and be engaged. Now, granted, there are times where there's been abuse in the past. There's been heartaches in this area. And I don't want to ever minimize those things. But our goal is to work through those. We may never get to the other side of it. We may always, in a sense, walk with a limp in that area. But we just need to move in that direction because this is a part of how God made men. Song of Solomon, again, talks about this, and this is the woman speaking of her husband. She says, "My dear lover glows with health, red-blooded, radiant. He's one in a million. There's no one quite like him." We actually, as men, want to believe that our wives think that about us. We really do. We really do. We actually would like you to go to, what's that, Chip and Joanna? You know Chip and Joanna? You know how they have those little writing, like that wood stuff? I think over every bed it should say this. It's, right over your bed. That's me, baby! To be a little plaque right over your, yeah. Men want to know. Men want to know that their wives like being with them intimately. Just, woo, it's crazy stuff. They want, we're getting real here. Because honestly, the church ought to be talking about this stuff because they talk about it everywhere else. Louder, everywhere else. Well, why wouldn't you talk about this in the presence where we're trying to follow God with our lives and be who He's made us to be? I won't go into the details of the next fill in the blank, but I'll just say it. In the bedroom, your husband desires for affirmation, creativity, and frequency. That's what he desires. Not weirdness, not craziness, but that's what he desires. And, as a wife, coming to terms with that, embracing that, understanding that is real. It's this, this is grown-up stuff. Again, I told you, PG-13 today. So as we're thinking about this, it doesn't mean that we're perfect in this, but we're at least traveling in that direction. And I don't know if you remember earlier, we talked about how a man's prayer life is affected by the way he treats his wife. I don't think that's just for men. I think our spiritual life is affected the way we treat our spouses, so the way women treat their men, and vice versa. And again, God doesn't expect us to be perfect, but He expects us to be moving in a certain direction with this. So God is more concerned with your direction than He is with your perfection. And I think your spouse is too. So when it comes to this, it's moving in this direction. It's trying to figure these things out. Because we can have a good 60, 50-year run as a married couple, however that may be. It doesn't, again, have to be 20 years and then it's just kind of this partnership for the next 30, 40 years. It can be great all the way. And we see scenarios where we see an older couple that still seems to be in love with each other. You've got to remember that attention determines direction in every area of our life. Where we're looking, what we're thinking about, where our focus is, determines where we start to go. I mean, just try it when you're driving. No, don't try this when you're driving. If you start looking at something, you'll find that the car drifts in that way. It happens every part of life. Happens with our married life, happens with other parts of our life. Attention determines direction. So seriously, I want to ask you, and I'm not expecting you to necessarily write all this stuff down, but earlier on we said that this idea of having a relationship with God helps govern this subject, helps us to walk through this. So I want you to think about where am I and where I want to be. And that may start right where you are spiritually. Have you said yes to Christ? Have you admitted your need for Him, realizing that your life is out of step with God's great design? And you need forgiveness for that. You need to be forgiven for that. Are you at the place where you believe that Jesus gave His life for you? And you want to accept His forgiveness and start a life that way? And choose to invite Christ into your life as the one you are going to follow? That may be your starting point for this whole subject is getting your heart right with God, so then you can start getting your heart right with your spouse. Because again, God is more concerned with your direction than with your perfection. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, this has been a little bit of an awkward subject, but it's a real subject. Lord, I pray that anyone in this room that's experienced, or even listening online, that has experienced great hurt in this area, that you would give them healing. People are abused and marginalized, and Lord, we just ask that you would step into that, and they would find that you can give them mercy and grace. But for those of us who are just trying to do this thing called life, and we're married, or we're thinking about getting married, or we hope to get married someday, or maybe we've had a marriage that didn't make it, or maybe a loved one's passed away. We just ask that you'd help us to have a better understanding of this. Help us to be a good voice of reason when we need to share. But Lord, help us as we navigate our marriages, that we could have the best marriage possible. We just ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.